character who haunts the narrative is a character who still has impact on the story despite their absence. A character dead or gone, but still alive in the narrative due to the things they left behind. But what about a character whose absence is only felt by the things they didn't leave behind? Because there's nothing left of their story. Not a thing they can call their own. What about Agnes Montague? Content warning. This video will contain discussion of a fictional character's suicide. And also some TMA spoilers. Wow, look! Cool cosplay! This is the reason why this video took so long to make this. I hope you enjoy. If you want to see more Agnes content, please subscribe. If you're not familiar with the Agnes Archives, it's an anthology horror podcast. The story goes as follows. The main character, Jonathan Sims, takes up the role as head archivist of the Agnes Institute after the previous head archivist, Gertrude Robinson's mysterious death, who, spoiler alert, will be important to this video. The entire series is John reading out people's experiences with the supernatural, every episode being a short horror story. While these things feel unconnected, the further you get into the series, the more connections you make between the statements, and you start realizing that there's a bigger narrative going on. Due to the fact the series is told through short stories from both past and present, the entire narrative is properly haunted. There are so many characters that are important to the narrative that we never get to see alive. And here, you see all my favorite Agnes Archives characters. I say, walking through a graveyard. And, well, Gertrude Robinson is a great example of that, because her character really defies what it means to be a character who haunts the narrative. Her death is the inciting incident of the story, but it's also, like, the key to one of the biggest plot twists in the entire story. But she's not really absent, is she? Because we still hear her voice plenty of times. She has the focus in many episodes. We get plenty of tapes of what she was like, and we get to slowly piece together her story. When we first are introduced to her, we only have her environment to figure out what she was like. Then later we find out that, well, John put it,
I'm starting to feel like the only correct assumption I made about her was that she probably liked tea.
A character death does not mean absence in the Agnes Archives. And it for sure does not mean a character will not be important to the story. Agnes's first appearance is in episode 8. Fun fact about me, there was like more than a year gap between me listening to like the first half of season 1 of the Agnes Archives and then like the second half, which means that I barely retained any of the information that I learned in that first season. Like, I barely knew who Jane Prentice was during, like, the season 1 finale on my first listen. But I remember so vividly where I was when I was listening to Burned Out and I was first introduced to Agnes Montague, because I don't remember, I, at the time, didn't remember anything about that statement beyond that little girl that was mentioned. The Agnes Montague haunts me. The way I become so much more sassy. I'm so slaying this. Like, episode 8, while not about Agnes, does cover a good portion of her childhood. And also the last part of her life, because episode 8 immediately confirms that Agnes is dead. But like, let's dial that back a bit. Let's talk about Agnes's life. And why she's such a talked about character despite only being mentioned in 7 episodes of the 200 episodes in the Agnes Archives. In the world of the Agnes Archives, there are these eldritch beings, known mostly as the fear entities. And these fear entities can move through humans if they so choose to align with them and becoming avatars. It is a very important part about that it is heavily stated that becoming an avatar is a choice. The choices people make within a system of oppression is inherently part of the Agnes Archives. It deals with questions around whether you are or are not a bad person for being forced to participate in a system that is actively made to harm other people, and how you deal with that, and the choices you make within that, and in how much you have control over that. And because of this, choosing to be an avatar and not just be part of the system, but to choose to be an oppressor and uphold the system, it has to be a choice to stop being human. And while it does kind of work with like dream logic and like metaphorical stuff and like a metaphorical death or an actual death, it has to be a choice. But Agnes didn't choose it. The cult of the Lightless Flame, worshippers of the desolation, wanted to create a messiah. One member who was pregnant stepped forth and they would burn her on a pyre. And as she gave birth, a baby was born from the ashes and baptized in boiling hot water. The cult named her Agnes. Agnes was born an avatar. She was born a chosen one. And as a chosen one, her fate was chosen for her. That is the core of her character. Raising what is the embodiment of destruction and fire isn't easy, and I honestly kind of love imagining the daily hardships of having to raise a god, and I am obsessed with like the quote from like Arthur about Diego getting them a children's help book on how to raise a baby when their baby is literally on fire. And just in general, Arthur and Diego's dynamic, you know, the people that basically raised Agnes, is untapped potential. I feel like you could make a really good sitcom out of that. Eventually, Diego and Arthur handed over taking care of Agnes to Hilltop Road, specifically Raymond Fielding, a web avatar. So when people around Hilltop Road talk about Agnes and the house on Hilltop Road, they mention how people's pets, like cats and dogs, would mysteriously disappear, and there is like kind of an implication that it was Agnes doing that, and with the additional detail that it possibly was Gertrude's motivation to become the person she is because the desolation killed her cat. There's an implication that Agnes was the one who killed Gertrude's cat. It's like never directly stated, but it's implied. Talking about Gertrude, there were two things truly tying down Agnes. The first thing was the tree at Hilltop Road that even tied her down after Hilltop Road was burned down by her. And the second was the ritual Gertrude did to tie her soul to Agnes's. Stuck in the web, Agnes couldn't do anything but wait. But, side tangent, in the whole of the series, there is this reoccurring theme of anchors, being used as a love language. It's like ties that keep you grounded. It is first mentioned by Georgie.
If you really think you're turning into something inhuman, you need people around you. You need anchors.
All my anchors are just as deep in this as me.
But you still need them.
And it is kind of a constant thing in the series. John was Tim's anchor during the unknowing and is what helped him snap out of the stranger and basically be able to actually take revenge for his brother. When John went into the buried, Martin understood that his rib wasn't enough of an anchor. It had to be something personal, which is why Martin left out all the tape recorders. Because an anchor is not something physical, it's something more emotional. And obviously, John saves Martin from the lonely. Tell me what you see. I see you, John. They are each other's anchors. It might be like a sappy theme for a horror podcast to deal with, but it is a very important part of the story. Emotional bonds is what makes us human. Love might not make the fear go away, but it makes it more bearable to have someone by your side. So, like, Gertrude and Agnes, right? Gertrude unknowingly tied herself to Agnes's soul when they only met like once. And what does Agnes see Gertrude as? Her anchor. Fuck coffee orgy as a love language. What about anchors? We don't know much about their dynamic, and kind of the mechanics of their soul bond is also just not explored. We know that Gertrude was a very cool and pragmatic person, but she still trusted Agnes, despite never having met once. When recording what might have been her last tape ever, what did she tell Jürgen?
Remind me to tell you about Agnes sometime.
And she says it in such a fond tone. Their fates were inherently tied to each other by no choice of their own. And despite their basically soulmate status, they kept their distance. A story that will forever be unknown. And like, when given the opportunity, the one question Gertrude had was,
what was Agnes like?
And Agnes's father figure responds with, I don't know.
I don't know.
And that's the quote that sticks with me. That's the thing with being a chosen.
Or it's just the point of someone else's story.
Agnes' story, like most of the stories in the Magnus Archives, is told through short stories about encounters with her. From her literal child ghost, a specter haunting a house, and the gossip of the people that lived around her childhood home about her, to the people that loved her, like her boyfriend or Jude, who had a very interesting relationship with Agnes, as it was one of blind worship. To most of Agnes's relationships, she was less a person and more an idea, a concept they could believe in, like most people believe in a god. Maybe Jude loved her as a woman or as a god. It doesn't change the fact that she was infatuated with her. And that is something that Agnes never was able to escape, because even in her own story, she was never allowed to be a person. And then we have the people that raised her that tell her story, but never her. What was she like? I don't know. And then she meets Jack Barnabas. And it's very clear she wants change. And Jack kind of brings that normality for her. She comes in every week to order
A large cup of black coffee with enough room for milk. She never actually put any milk in it.
Because to her this is a fun little activity. Something to do to feel normal. To be a person. It was a normal person thing to do. And that's what she wanted. She didn't want to be worshipped. She wanted to be a person. And Jack, for a second, gave her the hope that she could have had a normal life. And with that hope came doubt. Because she had always believed that her destiny was set in stone. She was going to destroy the world. But now there was something else. A possibility of something else. But even with Jack Barnabas, she never really escaped that concept of worship. Because even in his statement, he reveres her. He is as infatuated with her as Jude was. And so Agnes makes the first choice in her life. To kill herself. And that's why Agnes' story sticks with so many people. Because she was never allowed to have her own story. She never got to choose what her life was like. And even in death, she doesn't get to choose how it is told. Her personality, her voice, her thoughts and opinions, we'll never actually know them. We'll never know anything beyond what other people think of her. And that tragedy, that want for more, to know more about this character, is what keeps people talking about her. Here's how Agnes Montague can still win. It's a pretty long-running joke within the fandom, but it stems from the actual genuine thought and hope that people had when the series was still coming out, that she was going to be important. And, well, to imply she didn't have any importance is incorrect. Her killing Raymond Fielding and burning down Hilltop Road was part of the web's plan, but that's it. It was part of the web's plan. That's what the web wanted her to do. She never got to do what she was created for. She never got to fulfill her destiny. And it's probably the most perfect death for the embodiment of meaningless destruction. To die without meaning. But can she still win? In the Season 5 Q&A, when asked what character he would have liked to elaborate on, Johnny said that it was Agnes because he didn't expect people to have as much of an emotional reaction to his story.
And Agnes is a tricky one, because I was fascinated with this idea of this chosen one messianic figure that you never hear from directly, and you never get an actual definite, like, this is who she was. And that was an idea that fascinated me, this figure that's only built up through the perceptions of others. I think what I underestimated, and I kind of stand by that conceptually, I think I underestimated how much not actually hearing from her would leave that feeling a little bit incomplete.
Does that mean that Agnes will return in the Magnus Protocol? Because there is now an opportunity to do something with her. Because the Magnus Protocol takes place in an alternate universe. She could still be alive. But do we want that? Because I know for a fact that I kind of have a running joke about, like, how Agnes Montague can still win. And I do, to a certain extent, want to see her. I would love to know more about her. But at the same time, the point of her character is that tragedy. I would have loved to know more about her relationship to Gertrude. I feel like I'm pretty clear on being a pretty big Gertrude-Agnes shipper. Probably it's very obvious. But it's also like, the tragedy is the point. Do you take away that tragedy? The thing is, I'll talk about, like, Agnes theories in my actual theory videos, because there is, like, the Celia connection. I've talked about this many times, but if you've not watched my Agnes videos, Celia Ripley, also known as Lynn Hammond from Mac 100, is a girl who saw a fire ghost hanging above her room in her apartment, and Agnes died hanging herself in her apartment. A lot of people theorize that the ghost that Celia saw was Agnes. This has never been confirmed. But it's still a connection that, like, a lot of people see, and now that Celia is an important character in the Magnus Protocol, a lot of people are hoping that in some way she is going to be important again. Also, this video was made as kind of like a reward for hitting a money goal for Magnus for Gaza, which has now ended, sadly. But that's why this video is made. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's not the same as my normal Magnus content, but Agnes is a character I really enjoy and I like talking about. If you guys want to see more stuff like this, a bit more analysis on the original Magnus archives, I'd love to do that. There are certain topics I do still want to talk about. I think mainly Gertrude as a character I'd love to talk about more, for obvious reasons, because she's my favorite character, which is probably also why I talked a good bit about her in this video. I'm sorry, I'm just biased, but also their stories are very intertwined as characters, so it feels important to talk about her. I hope you liked this video. If you want to see more content, please subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts. Why do you like Agnes Montague? And I'll see you in the next video. More than a year gap between me listening to the first half of this. I really wanted to say the Silververses, didn't I? Gosh. I really wanted to say the Silververses.